Writers, let's talk absolute phrases. An absolute phrase is a great tool for varying sentence structure, but also just adding rich imagery, movement, and rhythm into your prose, as well as modifying an entire sentence. Authors for whom the absolute phrase is essential to their characteristic style include masters of writing like Toni Morrison, William Faulkner, and Virginia Woolf. We're going to take a look at some examples from literature and talk about how they're using the absolute phrase and why. But first, what is an absolute phrase? Grammatically speaking, an absolute phrase is a noun phrase beginning with usually a noun or a pronoun followed by modifiers such as adjectives, prepositional phrases, or often participle phrases, verbs ending in ing or ed or en. It's important to note also that absolute phrases require commas or em dashes to set them off. When I teach absolute phrases to my creative writing students, I usually describe it as a very cinematic grammatical tool for writers insofar as it kind of pans a metaphorical camera within a sentence, zooming in and zooming out of images. So let's take a look at some examples. First, from Flannery O'Connor's Everything That Rises Must Converge. Quote, "There was no bus in sight, and Julian, his hands still jammed in his pockets and his head thrust forward, scowled down the empty street." Notice how in this example the absolute phrase is giving us additional context and imagery to understand the sense as a whole. Yes, it's about Julian, but it's also about how Julian is inhabiting this scene. And notice also that metaphorical camera movement. We're zooming in on Julian's hands and the thrust of his head before zooming back out. It provides a kind of energy and movement to the sentence. Or let's take a look at this example from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. Quote, "Silently they ambled down 10th Street until they reached a stone bench that jutted from the sidewalk near the curb. They stopped there and sat down, their backs to the eyes of the two men in white smocks who were watching them." In this example, the absolute phrase serves almost like a graceful transition, panning the sentence's focus from our characters to these two men in white smocks. Let's look at Mildred Taylor's Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Quote, "Mr. Barnett, his face red and eyes bulging, immediately pounced on her." Try imagining this sentence without that absolute, and then you kind of see what the absolute provides. Yes, some granular detail describing the quality of Mr. Barnett's anger, but also its essential kind of interruption. The absolute phrase falling in the middle of the sentence here seems to represent this abrupt shift in Mr. Barnett's temper. And finally, let's take a look at Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Quote, "He found a rubberized canvas sea bag and he prowled the rest of the ship in his boots, pushing himself off the bulkheads against the tilt, the yellow slicker pants rattling in the cold." Cormac McCarthy loves an absolute, and here you can kind of see why.